As the warm hum of laughter and light conversation filled our backyard, I noticed my son Jacob doing something strange. He kept shifting around, always subtly positioning himself between me and the view of the pool. At first I dismissed it. He was a teenager, maybe a little nervous with all the guests around, but the more he blocked my sight, the more it felt intentional. I looked around at everyone. Family, friends, old neighbors we hadn't seen in ages, all gathered to celebrate Jacob's big day. My wife Sabrina was all smiles, flitting through the crowd with effortless grace. She was charming, as usual, the perfect hostess in her light summer dress, glowing as if nothing could crack her poise. But the nagging sense of Jacob's unusual behavior wouldn't leave me. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was overthinking, but curiosity gnawed at me. So I took a deliberate step to the side. Just as I finally caught a glimpse past Jacob's shoulder, my heart froze. There, by the edge of the pool, my brother Mark had his hand on Sabrina's waist, their faces dangerously close. And just like that, every suspicion I'd brushed off over the years came rushing back. For a long, endless moment, I stood there, feeling like a fool watching a movie where the hero was the last to realize his own life was falling apart. My brain raced to make sense of it. Was it some friendly gesture? A moment caught out of context? But I knew better. There was something far too familiar in the way Mark's hand lingered at the small of Sabrina's back, his thumb stroking small circles against her dress, and how she tilted her face toward him, just slightly. It wasn't the innocent scene it might have appeared to someone else. And Jacob, my own son, had clearly been trying to keep me from seeing it. He knew. Jacob noticed my eyes following them and quickly moved to block my view again, throwing on a nervous smile and starting up small talk about his plans for college, trying to redirect my attention. But his voice wavered, just barely, and he avoided my gaze. I forced a smile, nodding along to whatever he was saying, though I didn't hear a word of it. My pulse was pounding in my ears, every instinct in me itching to shove him aside and confront the two of them right then and there. But I held back. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of a scene. For years, Sabrina and Mark had done this right under my nose. I thought back to the times Mark had come over to help me fix things around the house, and Sabrina's overly cheerful greetings whenever he'd walked through the door. It was all painfully clear now. Moments that I'd brushed off as sibling closeness were something darker. All that time, I had convinced myself that Sabrina was simply thrilled to be part of my family. And Jacob, had he known this entire time? Was that why he'd been avoiding me these last few months, constantly checking his phone whenever we were together, anxious to keep this charade? As my eyes stayed fixed on them, a dark satisfaction began to bubble beneath my anger. Little did they know, I was ready. I hadn't just stumbled into this discovery. I'd been suspicious for years, and I'd quietly gathered all the proof I needed. Bank records, hotel receipts, and even photos I'd managed to obtain, all saved on a USB tucked safely away. They'd hidden their affair well enough, but I had all the pieces laid out now, each one of them sharper than the last. Every ounce of betrayal they'd given me, I'd collected and stored for this moment. I took a step forward, planning to get their attention, but stopped short. No, if they wanted to live with the illusion of their little secret, let them. They'd dug this grave together, and I intended to let them lie in it, starting with today. After all, this was a graduation celebration for my son, a day that should be about his accomplishments, not their sordid betrayal. I wasn't about to give Sabrina and Mark the pleasure of my outrage, my tears, or my pain. Instead, I turned away, brushing off Jacob's attempts to keep talking. I pulled the divorce papers from my coat pocket prepared just days earlier and slowly made my way over to where Sabrina stood by the drinks, unaware that her perfect, well-manicured world was seconds from crumbling. My footsteps felt heavier as I crossed the lawn, moving toward Sabrina. She was busy laughing with one of our neighbors, holding a glass of wine, the picture of ease and elegance. For a moment I almost forgot why I was walking toward her. I remembered the way I used to look at her, the pride I'd feel when she'd smile, that perfect, practiced smile. But now, I saw it for what it was, a mask. I steeled myself, fingers brushing the edge of the envelope in my coat pocket. Every detail was ready, all the evidence, and her signature was the only thing missing to make this betrayal complete. I stopped a few feet away, just watching her for a moment. It was fascinating in a way to see her so carefree, so blissfully unaware that the walls of her little world were about to come crashing down. She turned and noticed me, her eyes lighting up with surprise, a smile forming on her lips. "Lucas, there you are. Jacob said you were looking for me earlier." "I've barely seen you today," she said, taking a small step forward, glass still in hand. I forced a smile, my fingers tight around the envelope. "Just taking it all in," I replied, glancing briefly over her shoulder. Mark was near the edge of the crowd, talking to my aunt, but he kept glancing our way. "Good. Let him watch this, let him sweat a little." I could almost feel the shift in his posture, a slight tension as he sensed something amiss. "Is everything okay?" Sabrina asked, her smile faltering for a moment as she studied my face. She could sense something 2 years of marriage do that. I'd seen her worried look before, but never aimed at me, never with this subtle note of caution. I pulled the envelope out of my pocket and held it out to her. She stared at it, a look of confusion flickering over her face before she slowly reached out, accepting it. "What's this?" she asked, a touch of laughter still in her voice, as if she thought it was some surprise gift or an inside joke. "Open it," I said simply, crossing my arms, watching her face carefully. Sabrina hesitated, but curiosity won. She slipped her finger under the flap, her smile finally disappearing as she pulled out the divorce papers. Her fingers tightened around the pages, her eyes widening as she registered what she was holding. Her mouth opened slightly, a small, shocked breath escaping as she looked back at me. "Lucas, what?" she stammered, her usual composure shattered in an instant. I kept my voice low, controlled. "I know about you and Mark. I've known for years. I thought I'd give you the chance to come clean, to end it before it reached this point. But I guess that was asking too much." I tilted my head slightly, gesturing to the crowd around us. "I thought today was a fitting time to let you know that it's over. Congratulations, you and Mark can have each other, finally out in the open." Her face went pale, the color draining as she looked from me to the papers, then back to where Mark stood, his face now tense as he realized something was happening. Sabrina opened her mouth, perhaps to explain, to deny, but no words came out. I could see her desperately searching for the right thing to say, but there was nothing to salvage. She knew as well as I did that she had no excuse left. "I won't make a scene here. Jacob doesn't need to be dragged into this mess today. But tomorrow I'm gone, Sabrina. And I'm taking everything I built with me. You and Mark can have what's left." I turned and walked away, not waiting for a response, feeling the weight of years of betrayal finally start to lift from my shoulders as I left her standing there, clutching the papers that would end our marriage. As I walked away, I could feel Sabrina's eyes on my back, her world unraveling in her hands. It was a strange feeling, knowing I'd left her with nothing but the cold truth, served without the chance for her to twist it, to make excuses, to plead for forgiveness she didn't deserve. I slipped through the crowd, nodding politely at neighbors and family friends, my face calm, almost detached. But inside, a storm raged. Years of doubt, of painful silences, of wondering why our marriage had grown so hollow, now made sense. Each memory pieced together, forming a picture that had been right in front of me all along. I needed a moment to breathe, to ground myself, so I headed to the garage, where I could gather my thoughts in peace. The smell of old wood and oil, mixed with the scent of cut grass from earlier that day, settled my mind. I sat on an old workbench, letting the weight of everything sink in. My family, my brother, the son I'd raised and trusted, who somehow had been complicit in hiding this from me. A son who knew his father's dignity and loyalty, but chose silence anyway. The betrayal felt like a lead weight in my chest, pressing harder with each breath. Just then, the garage door creaked, and I looked up to see Jacob stepping inside, his face hesitant. He was wringing his hands, a habit he'd had since he was a kid whenever he was anxious. Seeing him like that, I felt a twinge of pity mixed with the bitter resentment churning inside me. He closed the door softly behind him and took a step forward, stopping when he saw the look on my face. "Dad," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you're angry. I get it." I gave him a hard, steady look. "Jacob, how long?" He swallowed, his eyes darting to the floor, his face shadowed with guilt. "Since last year," he finally said, his voice a tight thread. "I didn't mean to keep it from you, I swear. I thought maybe it was just a phase, that it'd end if I just looked the other way." "So you knew. All this time you knew, and you chose to protect them instead of telling me," I said, my voice a low, even tone that hid the deep, aching betrayal that threatened to choke me. His head dropped, shame pooling in his eyes. "I thought I was helping. Mom said you'd get hurt, that it was better if you didn't know. And Uncle Mark, he promised me it would end, that it was a mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake that's been going on for years. That's what he told you." Jacob nodded, his face contorting as he tried to hold back tears. "I didn't know what to do, Dad. I was afraid it would destroy us. Destroy us. Jacob, it already has, I said, the words escaping with a rawness I hadn't intended. You should have told me. I deserve to know the truth, not live like a fool, trusting people who've been lying to my face. Jacob's face crumpled, but I had no sympathy left. This was what they had done, all of them together. They'd left me isolated, kept in the dark while they carried on their lives behind my back. I stood up, crossing the distance between us, the weight of finality hanging in the air. You may think this is something you did for them, Jacob, but you've destroyed any respect I had left for them. And maybe even for you. I can't look at any of you the same way. Not now. As I brushed past him and walked back out toward the house, I heard him whisper, I'm sorry. But the words sounded hollow, barely registering. I knew nothing he could say would bring back the family I thought we'd been. With every step, I felt myself severing from them, my resolve growing colder, harder. I would rebuild alone, free of their lies, and this time, they would be the ones left in the dark. The sun had started to set, casting a dull orange glow over the backyard as I made my way back through the crowd, each step feeling like I was wading through thick mud. The party was still in full swing, laughter and clinking glasses oblivious to the turmoil that had just erupted beneath the surface of our lives. For everyone else, this was a celebration of Jacob's accomplishments, a proud family moment. Little did they know that this would be the last gathering we'd share as a family before everything shattered. As I reached the back porch, I glanced around, seeing Sabrina alone now. A shell of her former self, clutching the divorce papers in both hands, as if willing them to disappear. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale and drawn under the evening light, her eyes hollow. She'd given up on trying to speak, and I could tell by the look in her eyes that she was desperate for me to reconsider, to somehow undo the moment. But I felt nothing for her now, just a hollow numbness. Whatever love had been there had bled out the instant I saw her and Mark by the pool. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Mark, who was lingering near the edge of the yard, trying and failing to keep his usual confident demeanor. He looked like a man bracing himself against an incoming storm, his eyes darting between me and Sabrina, gauging the situation. I couldn't help but feel a dark satisfaction, knowing he was squirming, knowing that for once he was the one caught without a lifeline. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, and he straightened, his face masking whatever guilt or shame he might have felt. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I raised a hand, cutting him off before he could utter a single word. Don't. Just don't, I said, my voice steady and cold. Whatever you think you need to explain, whatever excuse you think will make this right, save it. We're done here. Aya. Mark looked away, unable to hold my gaze. And for once, the smooth, unshakable charm he'd always exuded was gone. I could see the cracks in him, the tiny fractures that revealed a weakness he'd always kept hidden. He'd spent years manipulating, lying, taking whatever he wanted, and now, finally, he had nowhere left to run. I turned back to Sabrina, my voice carrying the finality of the moment. I've spent years building this family, this life, thinking I was doing it with someone I could trust. I loved you, Sabrina. I trusted you. But you destroyed that trust the moment you chose him over us. So now you can live with him and live without me. She opened her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes, but I held up the divorce papers, reminding her that it was too late. Whatever she was about to say wouldn't change anything. I wanted her to feel the weight of those years, of every lie and hidden touch. The betrayal wasn't just a secret, it was a weapon she and Mark had wielded together, carving wounds into what I thought was a solid foundation. I turned to Jacob, who had quietly followed me back to the porch, his face still racked with guilt and regret. Seeing him there, so torn and broken, I felt a stab of sorrow mixed with bitter disappointment. He'd been pulled into this, forced to choose between loyalty to his father and a misguided sense of duty to his mother and uncle. But as much as I loved him, his silence had been its own kind of betrayal. I'll be leaving tonight, Jacob, I said quietly. I'll still be your father, and I'll always be here if you need me, but things are going to change. You need to figure out where you stand in all of this. And I hope, for your own sake, that you learn something from this. My voice softened. Sometimes silence isn't the same as loyalty. Sometimes it's just cowardice. He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. There wasn't anything left to say. Without another glance, I headed inside to gather the last of my things. I moved through the familiar rooms, the living room, where we'd watched movies, the dining room where we'd celebrated birthdays, the kitchen where we'd spent countless mornings together. Each step brought a wave of memories, bittersweet reminders of the life I was leaving behind. But I didn't let myself linger. Those memories belonged to a different man, one who had trusted too easily, who believed in loyalty that wasn't returned. When I stepped out the front door, my car packed with the essentials, the house stood behind me, quiet and still, the celebration muted. I could hear faint sounds of laughter and conversation, but they felt distant, like echoes from another world. I paused, looking back one last time, not out of regret, but to remember this moment, the end of a life built on lies and betrayal. As I drove away, the sunset painted the sky in deep reds and purples, fading to the blackness of night. I felt a weight lift, replaced by a strange, bittersweet relief. I was finally free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the hollow family facade. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew I was leaving behind the broken pieces of a life I no longer wanted. Whatever awaited me now, it was mine to rebuild.